Thank you for joining us. This is Peninsula 24.
Dynamics of the Korean Peninsula have gone through fluctuations in 2016, along with the 2 nuclear tests carried out by North Korea. Korean military authorities have decided to deploy the U.S. THAAD system in Korea and also pushed a General Security of Military Information Agreement, or GSOMIA, with Japan. Global society has agreed on stronger sanctions against North Korea to close the loopholes in the existing sanctions. Korea is now at a critical juncture amid the political turmoil facing the country. And there's been a growing need to reshape Korea's diplomatic and security policies by cooperating with the Trump administration and the U.S., one of Korea's closest military alliances. On this week's Peninsula 24, we discuss a variety of diplomatic and security issues that have grabbed the most attention in Korea this year, as well as the outlook for the future.
For today's discussion, we are joined by Nam Sung-wook, Dean of Graduate School of Public Administration at Korea University.
Thank you.
And Jeong-hun, Professor at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy.
Thank you.
And Go Myong-hyun, Research Fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies.
Thanks for having me.
Korea has faced a variety of urgent and critical security issues in 2016. I'd like to throw the first question to all 3 of you. What do you think is the most significant and diplomatic security issues in 2016? Professor Nam?
One of the most significant diplomatic and security issue was North Korea 2 times nuclear test in January and September. In matter of fact, the test came as a surprise because North Korean leaders Kim Jeong-hun did not make explicit shows the North Korea would try to nuclear test, because I think there are 3 kind of purpose of the Kim's nuclear test. First is the Pyongyang wanted to solidify his position among the technocrat and among the across the countries, and another purpose is to push out the Seoul and Washington to negotiate again with the Pyongyang. And the final purpose is the China pressure. North Korea one stone to catch 3 birds in a nuclear test.
Mm-hmm. Professor Min?
Yes, basically I agree with the Nam's opinion that North Korea's 2 nuclear tests and 24 missile launches this year should be the most important security issue to Korea this year. But I also want to pick the political outsider Donald Trump's surprising victory in the U.S. presidential election as the most significant diplomatic issue to Korea this year, because Trump's victory has brought too much uncertainty to Korea's security and economic interests. As you know, Trump made extreme aggressive campaign pledges to mobilize his main supporters during the campaign trail, and the people were worried about the consequences of his policies if elected. And still, we do not know much about the policy directions of Trump administration.
Okay. Dr. Go?
Yes, I pretty much agree with Professor Nam and Professor Min's comments on the major events this year. If I'd like to add something, it would be South Korea's agreement to deploy THAAD missile defense system in South Korea. In my opinion, that has fundamentally changed the dynamic between South Korea and China. The Park Geun-hye administration's China policy made a fundamental turn at the beginning of the year after the first nuclear test, but it was solidified when South Korean government agreed to deploy THAAD, and that's basically, South Korean government has to now think fundamentally differently about how to cooperate with China in regards to the North Korea's WMD program. So I think in combination with the election of Donald Trump, that means that the situation in the Korean Peninsula for the next year will be very precarious for South Korea. I think South Korea will be caught between the strategic competition between the two major global powers.
Year 2016 was started with along with the North's nuclear test. For me, it seems like inevitable for Korea to through the fear of nuclear provocations. Professor Nam, how do you assess the North Korean nuclear capability, considering the provocative actions conducted by the North Korea so far?
After the test, the North Korean Nuclear Development Institute announced some comments. It is almost completion stage right now. They announced the characteristics of a nuclear test, three kind of level. First is the smaller, and then lighter, and finally diversified warhead of the nuclear weapon. It's most powerful test ever since the 2006. They totally fifth times this year. According to the U.S. analysts of military powers, they developed almost 100 warheads until 2020s. Therefore, we have to live with the nuclear warhead upon the heads is the very serious threat right now.
Okay. Along with these continuing provocative actions, North Korea has become the most isolated country in the international community. And also on November 30th, 82 days after the North's fifth nuclear test, UN Security Council finally adopted a new resolution against the North Korea, the nuclear test. And following the previous resolution 2270, which was called for the strongest ever in UN history. It is this, and the resolution 2321 is the second resolution in 2016. Dr. Go, what is your overall assessment of the newly adopted UN Security Council resolution this time?
Yeah, first of all, when the international community announced that they would implement the resolution 2270, calling it the most powerful resolution ever, I fundamentally disagree with that assessment because, first of all, the 2270 had a loophole. The loophole there was called the livelihood exception, meaning as long as anyone couldn't prove that the exports by North Korea wasn't being diverted to military use, that was totally legal under the international community's regulations and the resolutions, and that was a major loophole that North Korea had taken advantage of, and that loophole has been closed with the new resolution 2321, and this is actually a fundamental step forward in the positive direction, obviously, because one of the major ways the North Korean economy has been able to develop itself was through the expanding trade with China, especially with North Korea's exports of commodities in mineral ores such as coal and iron ores. And that revenue source is being targeted with this new resolution 2321. And for example, there will be a new cap on the amount of exports that North Korea can make. So for instance, with the new resolution, the amount of coal exports to China will be capped at $500 million a year, which represents only 40% of the trade last year between the two countries. And I think that's going to have a material impact in the North Korean economy. And again, this is definitely a progress, regardless of whether China is going to implement this 100% or not, because before 2270, one thing that I give credit to 2270 is that that's the first time when the United Nations shifted the focus of the sanctions from non-proliferation, meaning only targeting a limited number of individuals and entities, to a start on economic sanctions. So instead of just targeting entities that the international community suspected of proliferating WMD and missile parts and weapons technology, it start targeting economic aspects of the North Korean society. And with 23-21, we are actually seeing the actual realization of that threat. And I believe if what we think is correct and what we forecast is that North Korea is going to suffer from these sanctions from now on. Mm-hmm. And we might be seeing some real prospect of bringing North Korea back to the negotiation table.
Okay. So then, just one more question for you, Dr. Go. And on December 2nd, Korea, along with the US, Japan, and major countries in Europe, has also announced that the unilateral sanctions against the North. It is also it is to tighten the screws on the money inflowing into the Pyongyang.
북한 외교활동 제약 강화 등 다양한 분야에서 기존 안보리 계리를 대폭 보완한 것으로 평가하고 있습니다.
What kind of influence will it have on the North Korean economy?
First of all, I mean, there will be no significant impact for now, obviously, because North Korea relies on China for most of its trade. So meaning, I mean, to a point, to the up to 90% of the trade, external trade by North Korea is with China, with just one single country. So actions by Korea and Japan and the United States are not going to have a significant impact in the short run. But yes, in the long run, it's going to have an impact. And for instance, North Korea is these days trying to promote tourism into the country because North Korea believes tourism is an important revenue source without really putting too much investment. Meaning you don't have to set up build factories to make money through tourism. But then if you look into the unilateral sanctions measure by the three countries, except for Japan, by Korea and United States, they mention the Air Korea, the flagship airline for the North Korean state. And by targeting that airline, it'll be difficult for Western tourists, especially Americans and Europeans, to fly into North Korea because by buying tickets from Air Korea will be in violation of sanctions, unilateral sanctions by the respective countries. So all these measures will add up to something significant in the long run, and also has another implicit effect, which is it shows to China that the countries, the major players in the region, plus the European Union, the United States, are very keen on having a sustained pressure on North Korea. So it will be difficult for China to say we are the only ones, carrying out actions against North Korea, because China will see that the other players are actually implementing significant sanctions against the country, against North Korea.
Yes, I want to add the Dr. Go's comments, and basically I agree what Dr. Go mentioned about the question, and financially it is not clear. About how much our own sanction against North Korea could affect North Korean economy, but politically, it can show clearly to the world community about how grave and serious North Korea nuclear threats should be to South Korea. And we can also show our determined action to actively support UN resolutions against North Korea instead of passively relying on those resolutions, and to take an active role to prevent North Korea from being a nuclear state for the peace of the Korean Peninsula. So I think that politically, our own sanctions have the symbolic movement for the peace of Korean Peninsula.
Okay. The U.S. presidential election took place in 2016, which has attracted a lot of attention from the global society. And along with the recent adoption of the new UN Security Council resolution against North Korea, there's been a growing need for stronger cooperation from the international society. However, at the same time, tensions between Washington and Beijing have been heightened, along with the unprecedented moves shown by the President-elect Trump. Professor Min, what kind of impact will the soured Washington-Beijing relations have on North Korean sanctions?
Well, generally speaking, good relations between Washington and Beijing would be helpful for the global cooperation on North Korean sanctions. And there is an argument that with the heightened tensions between Washington and Beijing, China could take advantage of North Korea to express its grievance and anger by not cooperating with the US and UN for North Korean sanctions. But I also want to raise a question. If Beijing has a good or great relationship with the United States, then how much can we expect China's cooperation on North Korean sanctions? I don't think that China would cooperate much more actively to implement UN resolutions against North Korea for whatever reason, including a good relationship with the US, because China still needs to have North Korea for its security interests. So I think that China wants North Korea to be stable as a buffer zone against US influence over East Asia, and also wants the stable and peaceful Korean Peninsula for its security interests.
China has risen as a country who can play a critical role in North Korean sanctions. As China has agreed on the newly suggested North Korea sanctions, it has tentatively halted coal imports from the north for about 20 days. Professor Nam, what do you think is the reason for such an unprecedented move of China?
20 days, almost 3 weeks, is too short period. I think the China's stance is very complicated in East Asian nuclear policy because China has emphasized the balance of power in East Asian countries. President Obama visited Hiroshima last May and pay attention to the dead persons of the nuclear attacks in 1945. Abe Shinzo also visited Pearl Harbor around the Christmas time this year. It means that the balance of power and the strong alliance between US and Japan. And China has some concerns. If the two-country alliance becomes stronger, they want to push and solve the nuclear weapon crisis. China wants to make a stick and just gesture. They want to be a gesture to stick the North Korea. They do not want the serious condition of the North Korean economy. Even if they asserted they stopped the 3 weeks this year, it is temporary actions. Particularly the Donald Trump president-elect, the telephone the Tsai Ing-wen of the Taiwan leaders. It is most surprising event since the 1979. It is the basic one China policy, the China diplomacy guideline since the 1979. However, the Donald Trump business mind, he violated the diplomatic important principle. And then China has a thinking about how to approach the Donald Trump's business diplomacy. I think he has a sophisticated diplomacy businessman. He's a shrewd businessman. And then basic idea of the Donald Trump is to want to solve the nuclear crisis by impressing the Beijing. And there are wide trade deficit between Washington and Beijing. The U.S. exported $80 billion, and imported the $170 billion imported from Beijing. There are wide trade deficit in U.S. And then they manipulate the currency of Chinese yuan. And Donald Trump is angry about the China stance. And then he nominated the Secretary of Ministers, the Tillerson, the former Mobile Exxon CEO. He is a pro-Russian businessman. And then he has no special mind to Beijing's. And then China has a double standard to solve the nuclear crisis.
Okay. Professor Min, China has maintained a passive attitude to the North Korean sanctions. And do you think it will change its stance and actively participated in implementing the Security Council Resolution 2321 this time?
Well, it's not clear, but personally, I think that it goes with the China's long-term plan, like the China to become a great country in the international community. And we know that it took some time between the 2270 and the 2321 resolutions, and we suspect that China and Russia took time before they agreed with this new resolution. And some people argue that China persuaded Russia to adopt the resolution. So we still need to have time before we figure out what kind of the thinking and the impact China got before adopting this resolution. But in my opinion, China had to follow its long-term plan, and it was kind of the inevitable movement for the country to become the great power. Although maybe China did not like this resolution because it could significantly affect the North Korean economy and give the bad impact for China's security interest in East Asia.
Okay. So I'd like to add something. I mean, completely agree with Professor Min's comments. Something that I'd like to add to is that if one looks into Chinese behavior when adapting Security Council resolutions against North Korea, it shows that China tends to see the Security Council resolution as the maximum maximum limit to what they do to implement actions against North Korea. This is in contrast to other countries. For South Korea and the United States and Japan, even European Union, UN sanctions resolutions are basically guidelines for whatever sanctions that this country can implement against the PRK, plus other unilateral sanctions. On the other hand, for China, once they agree to the United Nations Security Council resolutions, they abide by these resolutions, but they don't do anything beyond that. So in that sense, the fact that the measures that are being implemented against North Korea have increased in scope and as well as in strength compared to previous sanctions, I think it shows that China is more serious about taking actions when it comes to North Korea's nuclear program. So I think, there's some doubts about whether China would implement all the measures outlined in the resolution 100%. But then this is definitely a progress in the positive direction, in my view, and we should give it credit to Chinese for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Korea has gone through a variety of important issues, especially in the field of military affairs in 2016, including the SAD deployment in Korea, as well as Korea-Japan GSOMIA deals. So let's now discuss more about the ongoing controversies over the SAD deployment in Korea, which has recently become the significant challenges facing Korea-China relations. China has continuously reiterated its opposition to the THAAD deployment in Korea. And there's recently been retaliatory the actions taken by China unofficially. At the same time, China has actively participated in North Korea sanctions recently. Dr. Go, what is your outlook for China's stance in the future?
Yeah, so when I remember correctly that when like a South Korean government agreed to deploy THAAD, there was a huge controversy about the fact that the THAAD deployment was being opposed actively by the Chinese government, and the Chinese government would take a retaliatory action against South Korea, and so there was a lot of fear that China might link North Korea's nuclear issue with the THAAD deployment, meaning in order to retaliate against South Korea, China might relax sanctions or even lift sanctions against North Korea, and even entertain the idea of using North Korea as a strategic ally against the United States and South Korea. And I disagreed with that argument, because for China, North Korean nuclear program as well as South Korea's THAAD deployment are both problems. So there's no point for China to link the two problems and exacerbate the issue in the Korean Peninsula. So clearly, China is taking two-track approach to South Korea. Essentially, China is maintaining two sanctions regime, one against North Korea, the other against South Korea. For now, the sanctions against North Korea is official and also very strong and getting stronger. But then the sanctions against South Korea, it's unofficial, and it's still at a minor stage. And China keeps sending this implicit message that depending on how South Korea behaves in the next year or in the near future, China is going to might entertain the idea of increasing the pressure on South Korea. So China doesn't see any. I mean, this is a very a rational behavior on the Chinese, and this is very predictable. And this again affirms our understanding of what China thinks of North Korea.
Okay. GSOMIA between Korea and Japan, which was signed on November 23rd, has sparked a lot of controversies. What do you think is the most important issues facing the military agreement between the two countries?
I think the necessity of GSOMIA is the accepted. However, time is not so good. In 2012, the former government and the President Lee Myung-bak tried to make a treaty with Japan about the military knowledge shares pact. However, the government tried to secretly make a treaty with Japan, and the people's angry about the government's secretive attitude toward the Japan policy. As you know, the Japan has a negative attitude to the comfort woman and the Dokdo Island and the past histories. And another concern is that Japan is the combat country, is the more growing every year. Japan's self-defense army send the military powers in South Sudan right now. And people's the concern the Japan's position in worldwide in East Asian countries. Even if we accept the necessity of the GSOMIA, however, government position is not so right. And according to the surveys, the 69% have a negative attitude to the GSOMIA right now. I hope the new government try to make a sign about the GSOMIA, maybe next July or August.
I see. On December 16th, Defense Trilateral Talks, DTT, among Korea, the US, and Japan were held in Seoul. These three countries have reaffirmed their military cooperations against North Korea's any kind of military provocations. And the Korean government also has mentioned that it will maintain the current diplomatic stance on the THAAD deployment issue, as well as the implementation of the Korea-Japan GSOMIA. What is your outlook for Korea-US-Japan relations in the near future?
The further the three countries, the relations. The first, I want to talk about the Korea and U.S. relations. Unlike the aggressive campaign, the pledges that Donald Trump made during the campaign, the trail, but the president-elect Donald Trump mentioned during his phone call with President Park that the ROK-U.S. alliance would be strong. So I expect that there would be the little change in terms of the Korea-U.S. relations in terms of the security matters. But there is an argument that U.S. influence of East Asia could be weakened, mainly because of the Trump's America First policy. To safeguard our security interests, we needed to secure good relations with the other political actors in this region, like Japan, China, and Russia. And specifically for North Korean issues, we share, I think, the security interests with Japan. And Japan is also concerned about its security if U.S. influence of East Asia is weakened in Trump administration. So I expect that at least security matters, we have a favorable environment to have a close relationship with Japan, and we needed to take advantage of it for the security interests.
Okay. Year 2016 marks the 5th year of Kim Jong-un's regime in North Korea. And in May, North Korea held the 7th Congress of the Workers' Party of Korea. After preparing for the events for 6 months with great efforts, what do you think is the hidden intention of Pyongyang's hosting such a huge party event? What did they want to show the outside world?
I think the North Korean regime tried to demonstrate through hosting this party congress two contradictory messages: continuity and change. Continuity is more about the message to the outside, meaning Kim Jong-un's regime Kim Jong-un has solidified his hold on power. The regime is strong, and he's definitely in charge. That he's going to continue with the previous program of nuclear development and economic development, the so-called Byungjin line. But also, but at the same time, I think North Korea tried to send a message to the domestic audience. The message consisted of change, but this message has two components: change towards the future and and also change or reversion to the past. Meaning, eternal formation of the continuity between Kim Jong-un and Kim Il-sung, because the party congress took place after 36 years since the last one was held by Kim Il-sung himself. So there's that connection between Kim Il-sung, the founder of DPRK, and Kim Jong-un. And also, there's a more positive message to the North Korean public, saying that Kim Jong-un would actually focus more on the normalization of the political life in North Korea. Before Kim Jong-un assumed power, the official doctrine in North Korea was one of the Sung-gun policy, the military first policy. Essentially, it's a policy of national emergency, when the military has to be at the forefront of all the different aspects of the North Korean life. And in contrast to that, Kim Jong-un has proposed through this party congress to the North Korean people that he's going to restore the supremacy of the Workers' Party, meaning the return to politics of usual that was in place before the North Korean economy collapsed in the 90s. So we might, from the South Koreans' point of view, we might think, what's the meaning of having political life in a country like North Korea, where the single leader is omnipotent and then he can do whatever he wants. But then we have to think out from the point of view of the North Korean elites and North Korean people. From their point of view, the return of the party to the forefront of the political life in North Korea is a step it's a positive step, essentially. Meaning, the political discourse will be returned to North Korean society once again, and also there's an indication that Kim Jong-un might eventually turn the focus from national security to economic development. So I think it's clearly a homecoming party for Kim Jong-un. Recognition of his authority and affirmation of his authority in front of the North Korean elites and the North Korean public. But also there are these hidden messages that are very important.
Okay.
Yes, I'd like to one point. One of the biggest event in Korean Peninsula this year was two convention in Pyongyang last May and June. Kim Jong-un wanted to demonstrate that his position would become a level of his father and grandfathers. He wanted to become a level of gods compared to his father and grandfathers. South Korean, we don't understand such a big event and big rally party and convention. However, socialist country try to strengthen his leader's position through the big rally, big demonstration. It is understanding our South Koreans to domestic politics. And Workers' Party was a big event that Kim Jong-un fully catch the power of the parties. And another 13th Supreme General Assembly was an event that he take a grab of cabinet and the military areas. As a matter of fact, his father, Kim Jong-il, died 2011, December 17th. Almost 5 years have passed right now. Newspaper and another government analyst forecast young leaders Kim Jong-un will be collapsed in the near future. However, he is still alive and fully control of the Pyongyang positions. There's reasons the South Korean analyst and government do not discover his contention, his capability. Anyway, he is still powerful dictator in Pyongyang. Therefore, we have to watch out his age, not his age, but his capability and shrewd tactics to the South Korea and U.S.
Okay, then we have to think of on this side. Indeed, North Korea has focused on enhancing the internal solidarity, but there's been some changes recently. For example, in July, increasing number of defections by the North Korean elites, including Ambassador Tae Yong-ho, have made a lot of headlines. And the number of North Korean defectors in Korea has surpassed 30,000 this year. How do you view these such ongoing changes with the North? Can it be translated as a positive sign that North Korean regime might be changed someday in the future?
Yeah, I think it is a kind of certain evidence for North Korean regimes have an unstable situation. However, it's just kind of the pessimistic scenario. It's a kind of one side. However, another side is the 3,000 persons, just 2.5 million of North Korean, just less than 1%? No, less than 1%. Two minimum levels. Therefore, even if the Vice Ambassador level Tae Yong-ho defected the South Korea, we don't forecast the North Korea will be collapsed in the near future. I think the 30,000 of Pyongyang citizens defect the North Korea is the evidence that Pyongyang will be collapsed in the near future. Of course, it is a pessimistic sign. However, we don't hurry up the conclusion North Korea will be collapsed in the near futures.
Okay. And Pyongyang is not expected to carry out any provocative actions until the Trump administration unveils its own foreign policy toward North Korea. What is your outlook for Trump's policy toward Pyongyang? Do you think it can deter the North Korea's possible nuclear provocations?
Nobody can predict by 100% if Trump's the North Korea policy would deter North Korea's another nuclear provocation. And still, we do not know much about the Trump's North Korea policy. But considering that Trump's campaign talks that he would not allow North Korea to be a nuclear state, and that key diplomatic and security figures in Trump's administration have tough, strong attitudes against North Korea, I expect that Trump administration would continue to pursue the strong sanctions against North Korea. And North Korea is well aware that Trump's key advisors are tough on edge nuclear issues. And like us, North Korea does not have much information about the policy directions of Trump administration yet. So before figuring out the big picture of Trump's North Korea policy, Pyongyang does not want the situation to get worse by having another nuclear provocation. And South Korea is going through the political turmoil now. So another nuclear provocation could be taken advantage of by South Korean political actors as a way of alleviating the domestic turmoil. So I think that North Korea is well aware of that. So the North Korea would be very cautious in terms of having another the nuclear provocation in the near future.
Okay. Dr. Go, the U.S. President-elect Trump has shown unprecedented moves in diplomacy. How do you see the possibility of Washington-Pyongyang talks in year 2017?
Well, first of all, we have to think about what are the diplomatic priorities for the President-elect Trump. And as far as we can tell, the priority for the new Trump administration will be the Middle East, clearly, the suppression of ISIS, the Islamic State. And in that framework, Trump might actually entertain the idea of resetting the United States' relationship with Russia. So to create this common front against Islamic terrorism around the world. And then follow that priority will be probably the U.S. relationship with China. Trump has said several times during the campaign trail that he views China as a currency manipulator and then a free rider in the international order that the U.S. spends so much money maintaining. And therefore, Trump might try to create some issue, like some critical issues with China in order to increase U.S. leverage over the country. And the recent telephone call between the president of Taiwan and President-elect Trump is a sign in that direction. And so further down the list of priorities, I think somewhere down there is North Korea. And we know for a fact that Trump thinks that North Korea is basically China's problem. So if you connect whatever Trump has said about China and the fact that North Korea might not be the top priority for the new administration, we can imagine that President Trump would want to pressure China to take action against North Korea. And that means there will be increased strategic competition between China and the United States over the Korean Peninsula. So we know for a fact that the reason why North Korea has been launching all these provocations this year was because North Korea wanted to have one-to-one negotiation with the United States, and in a way forcing the United States to come to the negotiation table where North Korea and the United States will be discussing about the final status of North Korea as a nuclear state. And when North Korea finally realizes that the North Korea is not the top priority for the new Trump administration, I'm pretty certain that the North Korea is going to think about forcing again United States to come back to the negotiation table by launching a major provocation. So in that sense, and then if that happens, then the Trump administration will have this reflexive reaction to pressure China to take action against North Korea. We don't know we don't know exactly how long the whole process will take, but then the prospect of having negotiation, which is actually the end goal for North Korea, next year in 2017, will be pretty remote. I would say that when this entire news cycle of provocation and that counteraction by the United States is completed, that might take 2 or 3 years. So we might see some sort of a negotiation taking place in the near future, but not in the next year.
Okay. How do you assess the inter-Korean relations in this year, 2016?
Well, obviously, there's been no dialogue taking place between the two countries this year. So if you look from that perspective, the relationship between the two countries and two Koreas this year has hit the nadir in many ways, has hit the bottom. But then I think all the actions that the South Korean government had to take was in response to North Korean provocation, very grave provocations. It was unprecedented for a country to carry out 2 nuclear tests in the same year, along with several missile tests. We counted 24 so far. So so if inter-Korean relations this year has been awful in many ways, it wasn't because of South Korea, it's clearly because of North Korea's provocations.
Okay. Professor Min?
Yes, and I agree with Dr. Go's comments that the inter-Korea relations this year were completely freezed. I agree with that. And again, the South Korea got the top year in terms of the dealing with North Korea, the 2 nuclear tests and the 24 missile launches. So in that point, it could be inevitable that the South Korean government got the tougher stance against North Korea. And we got the conservative government. So I think that it was inevitable that the current administration of South Korea pursued the strong sanctions and no more the cooperations and the connections with North Korea. So I think that this year was a very tough year for the inter-Korean relations, and I hope that we could have a little bit better situations next year and in the near future.
Okay. It is very important questions that I'd like to listen all 3 of you for advice for next year for Korean government. How can you promote dialogue between Seoul and Pyongyang next year? And how can we get properly deal with the important diplomacy and security issues in upcoming year 2017? Professor Go?
Yes, I think this is my opinion that whatever government is formed next year in South Korea, that government has to assume a very conservative approach to the international relations as well as inter-Korean relations, meaning there will be a strong temptation for the new government to change direction next year in order to differentiate itself from the previous government. But then South Korea and actually the whole world is a time of uncertainty. The Brexit took place this year, and also there's election of Donald Trump, and especially Donald Trump is promising fundamental change to U.S. relationship with its allies. So we don't know exactly what kind of policies he's going to implement, but for that reason, we should be extra careful about putting some sort of a directional change to our policy towards North Korea. We have to have this wait-and-see kind of approach. We have to affirm our continuity in terms of the agreements that we have signed so far with our allies and neighboring countries. So this should be our important policy characteristic for the new government. In addition to that, though, we can explore on the side having some sort of re-establish the channel of communication in North Korea. Right now, North Korea has pushed South Korea aside and wants to have direct communication with United States only, and that has put South Korea on the defensive, and then we are also in the dark about North Korea's ultimate strategic motivations. For the reason alone, we should start some channel of communication in North Korea in order to have clarify our future foreign policy strategy.
Okay, Professor Min.
Well, for your question, I'm a little bit pessimistic about whether our South Korean government would have both the economic sanctions and the direct dialogue with North Korea next year. Under the current political situation in South Korea, I don't think that the current administration would have any kind of a motivation to pursue both the approaches to deal with North Korea. And I think that the current administration just would continue to pursue the strong sanctions against North Korea. And it is expected that in the middle of sometime next year, there would be the next president election in South Korea. So we need to see which candidates would run for presidency with the major party labels at the time, and then we will be able to figure out their roadmaps to deal with North Korea. Then we can talk about whether the next presidency would pursue both the strong economic sanctions and the direct dialogues with North Korea, or some other approaches.
Okay.
Interrelations between Koreas will continue as an ice period because we have to deal with the nuclear weapon crisis, regardless of the new government in next year. Even if the opposition party win the present election, they have to hold up the inter-Korean relationships because of the nuclear weapon and missile crisis and WMDs. Particularly the President Donald Trump's push of the South Koreans to antagonist the North Korean countries. Their first, the order is first, global perspective is first, and the local approach is next. And then new governments must cunning and wisely accommodate the global pressure and local opinions. We should accommodate the wisely next year.
Okay. Thank you so much for taking your time and sharing your opinions today.